Prime Minister Netanyahu's extremist government has not simply waged war against Hamas. It has waged all-out war against the Palestinian people. After nearly 1 year of this carnage, out of a population of some 2.2 million people, more than 41,000 Palestinians have been killed and nearly 95,000 injured, 60% of whom are women, children, or elderly people. Madam President, Netanyahu's policies have trampled on international law, made life unlivable in Gaza, and created one of the worst humanitarian disasters in modern history. We cannot continue to turn a blind eye to the scale of the suffering caused by this all-out war against the Palestinian people. 136,000 casualties, most of whom are civilians. The full toll is likely even higher, with thousands of bodies buried beneath the rubble. Madam President, 90% of Gazans, 90% of the people in Gaza have been displaced from their homes. 1.9 million people. Many families have been displaced again and again and again, forced to uproot their lives and pick their way across a war zone with their children and what little they can carry. These are poor people going from place to place amid bombing and total destruction. When these families find, finally, a safe place to seek refuge, perhaps setting up a tent in a so-called safe zone, they are often then forced to evacuate due to renewed Israeli bombing. Madam President, few of these people even have homes to ever return to. More than 60% of Gaza's housing has been damaged or destroyed, including 221,000 housing units that have been completely destroyed. Imagine going from place to place knowing that you're never going to be able to return to your home. Today, as a result of the devastation of housing in Gaza, more than 1 million people are homeless. And I would ask my colleagues to try to think for a moment what it means to be carrying your children from place to place in the heat, without food, without water, knowing that your home that you came from has been destroyed. And that's what's going on today. Madam President, what we are witnessing now is not just the loss of human life, as severe and horrible as that is. Gaza's civilian infrastructure has been devastated, including water and sewage systems. Raw sewage runs through the streets, spreading disease. The Netanyahu government has systematically, and I've talked to doctors about this, devastated the healthcare system in Gaza, knocking 19 hospitals out of service and killing more than 800 healthcare workers. So you got 95,000 people who have been injured, including a lot of children, and yet 19 hospitals have been knocked out of service. The World Health Organization has recorded thousands of attacks on healthcare facilities. Madam President, Gaza has 12 universities. Every single one of them has been bombed, as have hundreds of schools. 88% of all school buildings in Gaza have been damaged. Every university bombed, 88% of all school buildings in Gaza have been damaged, and more than 500 people have been killed while sheltering in UN schools. And Madam President, as horrific and unspeakable as all of this is, there is something even worse taking place in Gaza now. And that is as a result of Israeli restrictions on humanitarian aid. People in Gaza are now starving to death. Leading experts from the UN and other aid organizations estimate that some 495,000 Palestinians, a quarter of the population, face starvation. These groups estimate that more than 50,000 children require treatment now for acute malnutrition and are at risk of starving to death. 50,000 kids facing malnutrition. And I'm not a doctor, but I know enough to tell you that will impact these children for the rest of their lives. That's what childhood malnutrition does. This, Madam President, is a clear violation of U.S. and international law. Not just immoral, not just outrageous, but a clear violation of U.S. and international law. Bombing and shelling carried out with U.S.-provided weaponry. In the last year alone, Congress has voted to send more than $10 billion in American taxpayer dollars to the extremist Israeli government to buy more of the bombs and more of the weapons they are using to wage war against the Palestinian people. Madam President, enough is enough. U.S. complicity in this horrific war must end. I will soon be introducing a number of joint resolutions of disapproval which would block some $20 billion in new arms sales to Israel. Resolutions of disapproval are the only tool Congress has to block arms sales which are inconsistent with established U.S. and international law. The Senate will vote on these measures. Madam President, during the August recess, the administration sent to Congress official notice for several sales to Israel. The arms sales total over $20 billion. These weapons are being used in violation of U.S. and international law. Madam President, the whole world has witnessed Israel's restriction of humanitarian aid. The UN and virtually every humanitarian group says that Israel's restrictive policies are the primary cause of the humanitarian catastrophe now taking place in Gaza. Madam President, no matter how people here in Washington may try to spin it, the simple fact is that we must end our complicity in Israel's illegal and indiscriminate military campaign, which has caused mass civilian death and suffering. Every time a deal appears close, Netanyahu moves the goalposts, introducing new demands and torpedoing the deal. It is clear to me that Netanyahu is prolonging the war in order to cling to power and avoid prosecution at home for corruption. But it's not just his sabotage of a ceasefire for hostage deal. Netanyahu has also overseen record settlement expansion in the West Bank and unleashed a wave of violence there that has killed nearly 700 Palestinians, including 150 children killed over the last 11 months. Because so much focus is on Gaza, we are not paying attention to the disaster taking place in the West Bank. Madam President, Americans have also been caught up in this bloodshed. On September 6th, Israeli security forces shot a 26-year-old American recent college graduate in the head near an illegal settlement in the West Bank. In January, they shot and killed a 17-year-old American high school senior from Louisiana. In February, they shot and killed another 17-year-old American from Florida. And in October of last year, they nearly killed a constituent of mine from Vermont, Dylan Collins, a journalist for Agence France-Presse, with 2 tank rounds. 6 journalists were wounded in an attack which killed a Reuters journalist. The group was clearly marked as press. These are the same tank rounds the administration would provide to Israel in this sale. Needless to say, there has been zero accountability for these deaths. And of course, there has been no accountability for the repeated Israeli settler attacks enabled by security forces on Palestinian towns and villages. No meaningful response to the burning of Palestinian homes and businesses. Nothing but silence in the face of a concerted right-wing Israeli effort to illegally annex the West Bank. Yet those are the Netanyahu extremist government policies that these sales would reward. And I say that to my colleagues. All of this is going on. And should our response to Mr. Netanyahu say, keep it up, here are more arms, here are more money? A government that has caused mass civilian deaths, flouted U.S. and international law, should not be receiving more financial aid from America and should not be receiving military weaponry from the United States. Madam President, passing a joint resolution of disapproval is not only the right thing to do, it is not only the legal and appropriate thing to do, it is also what the American people want us to do. According to a June 5th poll from CBS News, 61% of Americans oppose sending weapons and supplies to Israel, including 77% of Democrats, 62% of independents, and many Republicans as well. And that poll is consistent with earlier polls. Madam President, blocking these sales would also be in keeping with actions taken by the international community and some of our closest allies. So what I'm suggesting here is not unique in the world, taking place all over the world, including some of our closest allies. There has been widespread condemnation of Israel's conduct during this war from governments around the world, international institutions, and humanitarian organizations. The United Kingdom recently suspended 30 export licenses for a range of armaments after concluding there was an unacceptable risk they could be used in violation of international humanitarian law. Germany has not approved an offensive weapon transfer since March. Italy, Spain, Canada, Belgium, and the Netherlands have taken similar steps. United Nations bodies have called for an end to the arms shipments fueling the conflict. Madam President, we cannot continue to ignore what the extremist Netanyahu government is doing in Gaza. We cannot continue to be complicit in this humanitarian disaster. The time is long overdue for the U.S. Senate to act, and we must act. I hope my colleagues will support this effort on the floor, and my office is ready to answer any questions that senators may have. Madam President, I yield the floor.
At the time of the making of this video, according to Al Jazeera English, so far, more than 41,000 Palestinians, including more than 16,000 children, have been killed in this war. According to The Lancet, it is not implausible to estimate that the actual death toll might even be up to 186,000 or even more. This has got to stop. It's time for an arms embargo against Israel and a ceasefire now.